The Giants are catching up to the Reds, and they're right behind the Mets. The Yankees swept the Jays. They're 2 games behind. This week in baseball, we're going to talk about the stat of the week, which is going to be about watching baseball, and the under the radar story of the week. That's going to be, why are fans behaving so badly? It's This Week in Baseball. Yoshinobu Yamamoto, as you well know now, almost had a no-hitter.
Right, down to his final out against the Orioles. And, we thought he was going to be able to do it. And then, boy, did that turn around.
Well, right.
He not just one swing of the bat, but what happened afterwards.
He didn't just lose the no-hitter. He lost the game, and that's the strange thing.
Right, so Jackson Holliday hits the home run to break up the no-hitter. And I think, I'm not sure how many, but there's a lot of pitchers that have lost a no-hitter with 2 outs in the 9th inning, or perfect games with 2 outs in the 9th inning.
Well,
uncommon as you'd think.
Well, it's happened. It happened last year. Framber Valdez got through 8 2/3 of last year. This is just getting through with a no-hitter, not necessarily a perfect game. Alex Cobb did it in 23. Dylan Cease did it for the White Sox in 22. So I was kind of surprised when I started going back how often this is happening. You think it's such a rarity. But Miles Mikolas did it in 2022. 8 2/3 innings. I mean,
I got to think of that. Was it Andres Jimenez, that Detroit Tiger pitcher? That was a perfect game. That was
Galarraga. That was Galarraga on the bad call at first base.
But that was an infield hit, so it broke up the no-hitter. Perfect game on a hit there. That was 2 outs in the 9th inning.
But the Dodgers, lose the game to the Orioles, and then, of course, you losing to the Orioles right now, you got to be pulling your hair out because they're not a good team, and you're supposed to be driving for the playoffs. And all of a sudden, the Dodgers are only a game and a half going into Sunday night over the Padres, who have not been playing great themselves, but enough better than the Dodgers did. So they're right on their heels.
I think we're going to have a really, really entertaining, race down the stretch here. Both leagues, for as much as we were talking about in the midseason, how the NL looked like it was going to be the 5 or 6 playoff teams we knew who would be, and that there wasn't going to be much interesting going on in the American League. Well, we were all wrong about that on this podcast, because the American League East looks like it's going to be a lot of fun going down the stretch. And the race for the last wild card spots are going to be really tight.
I tend to think, though, in the National League, aside from the Dodgers and the Padres now, it's a competition, right, for the division. They're all playoff teams. They're set.
The National League is more set in stone. It requires both teams kind of playing bad and other teams now playing well. We're inside of 20 games. When you're a team that's trying to make up 4 or 5 games in the wild card, that's hard to do inside 20 games, because it really requires not only you playing really well, but
somebody collapsing.
Somebody kind of collapsing down the stretch, which is totally possible, but it's not easy to have happen.
The Mets, who had a tough weekend, have had a 95% chance of making the playoffs going into Sunday. So that just tells you that the Reds and the Giants, as much as they've made a nice run, they've got to do so much to increase their percentage more than 5% or something like that, which is where they're at right now.
And the Giants and the Diamondbacks are heading into a nightmare series this week where they play each other. And any game lost at this point for those teams is just incredibly backbreaking. So you could see one of those teams almost eliminated from the wild card race just on the basis of that series.
Yeah, a good point in bringing up the Diamondbacks, because we really haven't talked about them very much, and they all of a sudden came back to be lurking, really not that far behind the Giants and the Reds.
What we were talking about all year with a good 4-team NL West kind of accidentally ended up happening.
They beat each other up.
Right, they beat each other up. But you're really seeing the National League in that the thing that I didn't expect, I guess, it really is that the NL East is the weakest division.
Well, only because you have only 2 teams that you really can count on, with the Braves going down the tubes this year.
And I'm disappointed in the Washington Nationals. I expect
they had a good little run there for a while, and then they went in the tank again.
The Marlins have overperformed, and I think they have some things to be excited about next season. You're
having Alan Contra pitch a little bit better recently is hopefully he's that guy.
Right, it starts to look like himself. But they've got some nice young talent on that team. They're offensively. Finally, I think that's the thing, is that they've had some young pitchers, but they've never had guys on their roster that you've been excited about. They have a couple guys now that are starting to look pretty good at the plate.
So I think you're right in the National League. And here's the thing about the National League: the Brewers are the best team in baseball, but I don't think anybody in the National League thinks the Brewers are unbeatable in the playoffs. Right when you get to that,
I think the Brewers are unfortunately sort of in the place where the Baltimore team was a couple of years ago.
Got to show me.
Where you got to show me in the postseason. You had a really heartbreaking loss last year to the Mets in the first round, which you could say is you comported yourself better than the Orioles did in that first run, where they just got swept right out. But you're going to have to go in. You're going to have a home field advantage in a series against some team, whether it's the Mets or the Cubs or the Padres, and you got to win that series. I can stomach a loss in the NLCS to the Dodgers.
You got to win the division series because they're going to get a bye.
Right, they're going to get a bye.
They're going to get a bye,
you can't lose that series. If you lose that series, you kind of wrap back around to like what is that team actually going to be? Because again, it felt like a year where everything sort of came together. And you got to kind of do more with that than a first-round playoff exit.
Well, and the Mets we talked about, and they're the third wild card team right now. We think that's kind of the playoffs are set in the National League, but the Mets had a tough weekend. In addition to losing 2 out of 3 to their pursuer, the Cincinnati Reds, they lost Davey Johnson, who also managed the Mets and the Reds, among other teams. So
very sad news.
Very sad news. Davey. Look, I loved Davey. I followed everything he did, coming from the guy that hit the ball to left field to end the '69 World Series when Cleon Jones went down to one knee and caught it, to the guy that hit 40 home runs for the Atlanta Braves, one of 3 guys to hit 40 home runs in 1973, Hank Aaron and Darrell Evans being the other 2 guys. And then he comes and he manages in the minor leagues for the Mets, brings analytics in, mathematics and all that, and brings 2 players up from the minor leagues when he gets the major league job in 1984. Wally Backman and Dwight Gooden in particular, and that changed the Mets' fortunes because he basically did stuff way before his time when it came to using analytics to help understand what he should do in certain situations. So has a winning percentage of .562, having won 1,000 games as a manager. We talked to our friend Cooperstown Dave about Rule B candidates in a podcast a couple of years ago, and I never really was super high on Davey being in the Hall of Fame as a Rule B candidate, but I think he's got a case. There are guys probably in front of him. Yeah. I think Dusty gets it before he does, but I think Davey Johnson certainly sorely missed, and the best manager in Mets history. I don't think there's much you can say about
probably
that.
Not, yeah.
Unless you want to say Gil Hodges, but he just didn't unfortunately do it for long enough. So the Mets and with the Mets this season bringing up the 3 kids in the rotation now, so it's a real change in fortune for the Mets in terms of the way they look right now.
Right. It's made it a lot more fun to watch because their starting pitching has been so painful to watch, and McLean's obviously been the best of the bunch. He's 4-0 to start his career, which is something that hasn't happened in over a decade. So it's going to be, I'm sure we're all going to be very excited to see his next start here against the Phillies coming up, because if he can win that one, then he's going to get tossed into the conversation, though he will not win. People will talk about him as McLean for rookie of the year. I'm telling you, if he gets to 5-0 and he pitches a great game against the Phillies, people will start talking about that.
And that Met Phillies series, 4-game series in Philadelphia starting on Monday, was supposed to be a real big series. It is for one of the teams, and that team is not the Phillies.
It's only a real big series for the Phillies, paradoxically, if they get swept.
Yeah. Come on.
But that's the only way it becomes a big series. Even if they go 3-1, they'd still have a 4-game lead with 16 games to play on the Mets. You're not likely to lose that. So you're for the Phillies, really the only way it becomes an important series is to lose all 4 games, which they're not going to do at home.
And fast forward, and the Mets have a good chance to make the playoffs now. How they're going to pitch in the playoffs is going to be really interesting now that you've got these.
I would just be happy to make the playoffs.
Yeah, so that's something there. And
looking at teams, trying to make the playoffs, though, unfortunately, I think a big injury for one of them is looking over in the American League East. The Red Sox lost Roman Anthony for 4 to 6 weeks as he comes down with an injury. And that's just a shame because he was having such a good stretch here in the majors. And it makes the AL East race a little bit less interesting now.
Well, because you think that it's going to be harder for the Red Sox now to catch the Yankees. They've been chasing the Yankees. They caught them, and then they fell back again. The Yankees, after a sweep of the first-place Blue Jays, are only a game out. So certainly that is up for grabs.
They're 2 games back as of today.
They're 2 games. It was 2 or 4. My mistake. 2 or 4. So they got it to 2 by winning today. And the Blue Jays, I've heard a few people say, and I'm sure the Blue Jay fans feeling this, the footsteps are coming. And, are they going to, give it up as they seem to sort of fall apart late in so many seasons? It's
the good news
getting a little echoes of that right now.
It's unlikely for them to fall apart enough where they don't make the playoffs.
Oh, no, I agree with that.
So I think that's the good thing. I think what you've got, an interesting thing is you've got the Seattle Mariners sort of precariously hanging there in that final wild card spot. With the flip side being, if the Astros play bad enough, they could potentially back up into a division crowd.
They've done that before.
While losing out on a wild card spot. That could definitely happen here. I think the Detroit Tigers, they're probably the most comfortable.
Yeah, they
team
got an 8.5 game lead.
Right.
They're fine.
They're fine. They don't feel any pressure. They're about fine tuning for the playoffs. The Brewers are sort of in the same spot. Those are in the Phillies, as long as they don't get swept against the Mets this week, are in that same position. Every other division's relatively up for grabs still, so I think that's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I think it's more the wild cards. Obviously the American League West, because the Astros haven't salted it away yet, and because the Mariners are foundering a little bit, and the Texas Rangers are hanging around. They won't go away.
They haven't gone away. They keep falling back and then picking themselves back up. But, if one of those two teams plays great down the stretch, they got like 20-something games left. If one of them goes off and they put up a 15-5 record or something like that, that's how one of those teams could suddenly get a division crown.
Right, you've got to get hot like that at the end of the season. I want to talk about a couple of players. One, playing for the Yankees, this guy who destroyed the Mets in the playoff a few years ago when he was with San Diego. Trent Grisham. If you would have told me that he was the guy that was going to have 30 home runs, and play stellar defense in the outfield for the Yankees, and it's not the Martian, Jason Dominguez,
right,
who's not had much of
them a year that nobody could have expected.
I don't think he gets enough credit for how good he's been and how important he's been to the Yankees because, at one point, remember, they used to have DJ LeMahieu on this team, and so
I think that was much to their displeasure.
and so they've done made a lot of changes, having Ryan McMahon over there, and they're finding a way to hang in there with Aaron Judge, not dominating as much as he did early in the season.
That's a good thing. The fact that Aaron Judge had to play at that level for that team to be a shaky first place team is concerning, because if Aaron Judge was playing like that now as they were composed, they would be destroying people, I think.
And we talked about this last week. Max Fried is their number one, if you ask me, their pitcher, and he had a good start this week, and you need him to be vintage Max Fried if the Yankees are going to go and do anything in the playoffs.
Yankees, you can kind of go, okay, you know what? I think the only worries that you have is you get Garrett Cole back next year, but can you really count on getting another year like this out of Trent Grisham?
Well, that's it. Exactly right. I think he was the throw-in in the Juan Soto deal.
And even then, how many more years are you going to get out of this from Stanton?
Yeah, he's having a very good year.
He's having a very
good playing year. Outfield.
He's playing outfield. Right. And
what?
He's up there in age. He's like 36. Yeah. I think he's either 36 or older.
He's got a sniff at 500 home runs.
Right, but it's like, how many more years can you rely on him like this? And you still haven't. And you still haven't solved the first base problem.
Nope, you still haven't, and you can do that in the off seasons. They're going to try to do something, this season still. They're certainly not done yet. And the other player I wanted to talk about plays for the still first place team in the AL East, and the Blue Jays, and having a resurgent season and an unbelievable stretch. George Springer. Have you seen what George Springer has done?
He's had a year out of nowhere.
So he has the second most leadoff home runs all time behind Ricky Henderson. I think he hit his 62nd the other day.
He's batted leadoff for a long time.
So Kyle Schwarber has something to chase down, right? Because he's not even batting leadoff so much anymore. But he had a run at it for a while. But Springer is not the guy. It's not the guy you would think is second to Ricky Henderson.
You would think of him as a traditional leadoff guy.
Right. And so I think he has been the glue that has helped Toronto, maintain first place. So I also noticed this week other players that Cal Raleigh, we talk about Cal Raleigh all the time, who was quieted down a little bit with the home runs, although he did hit his 52nd home run over the weekend. He has 42 home runs as of Sunday.
52.
As a catcher. So 10 of those home runs were as a DH, and he tied the record for the most home runs in a season by a catcher. Whose record is that?
Is it Todd Hundley?
That's a good guess, but no. Todd Hundley had 41 home runs, and I don't know if he hit them all as a catcher. He might have. No, it's Javi Lopez.
Wow.
Right? Javi Lopez.
Had 42 home runs.
Had 42 home runs at the catcher position for the Braves, all those years ago.
Hundley, I can't imagine, got too many home runs playing anywhere. He had 41 that year.
There was no DH.
Unless he played a couple games
first base or something like that. I don't remember if he played there or not, but he might have. So I also noticed that there's only one hitter left batting 300 in the National League. I don't know why I've had this morbid fascination with the National League leader hitting 296 or something like that.
Well, Trey Turner's at 305. Sal Frelick is right behind him at 299. George Springer is hitting 305 over in the
But
American
that's in the American League, and Judge still has the lead there.
Right. So you're going to have 300 hitters in both leagues. So
Okay, you think so?
We're not going to. I think one of those two guys in the NL is going to stay over it.
Okay. Do you want to talk about the Framber Valdez game against the Yankees this week?
I think it's interesting because we were going to talk about our underappreciated story of the week is bad fan behavior, but we had an instance of bad player behavior.
Yes, that is true.
Here with Framber Valdez, I really don't know how to put it other than intentionally crossing up his catcher to hit him with a pitch. I can't think of what else he was trying to do in that situation.
He denied it, of course.
Of course, right. But he didn't really deny it. Did you see what he said in his denial? It was basically like, oh yeah, he didn't even really deny.
I didn't want to throw that pitch.
Yeah, so
I threw the pitch I wanted to throw. Which was straight into your chest.
That's a denial. That's an admission.
So well, Framber is a volatile player and has had emotional outbursts before on the field, and this is not that out of the ordinary for him.
Right, but it's certainly the kind of thing that it's just such a bad look for your team and for a player like that to do that to your catcher. Because I'm surprised. And I'm going to say this because I don't think that was the regular Astros catcher in that.
And it wasn't. It was a young catcher.
That's what kind of makes it even worse, because if that was a starting catcher, if that was whoever their regular catcher was, like if that was Francisco Alvarez, he wouldn't be able to take that lying down. He would get up and go have words with that pitcher.
That would be something.
For doing that. I think a lot of catchers would. But this was a kid in maybe one of his first major league games for Framber Valdez.
He's not going to go question Framber.
He's not going to go question Framber. So I think that makes it even worse in some respects. Is that it was somebody that couldn't really stand up for himself in that situation.
Well, you're right. It certainly was bad behavior. And speaking of bad behavior, I just want to mention that in a couple of weeks, 2 weeks from today, we're going to have author Jane Levy, who didn't exhibit any bad behavior herself, but she's talking about the bad behavior in her new book, Make Me Commissioner, How I Can Fix Baseball.
Because she had written in her first book, it was about the bad behavior of sports writers in baseball in the locker room and the players and all that. That was a fictitious account. But this is a more real life story about why she should be commissioner.
She's written the definitive biography on Sandy Koufax and Mickey Mantle called The Last Boy, which is a terrific book. And she also wrote a biography on Babe Ruth. So we look forward to having her on. She's got some interesting ideas, and she's a really sharp wit. So I'm enjoying the book. Just about finished with it. So that'll be a lot of fun. And we're going to talk about the fact that the NFL season, we're going to kind of dovetail into some of our topics, our stat of the week and whatnot. The NFL season started, and I wonder how much baseball fans watch football when the two seasons are concurrent. And does that a dividing line for your baseball fanness if you start watching football?
And I think we're going to be getting into the games watched here, and what does it really mean to be following your team? But I think we got to go back first and talk about when you're watching your team. It's important not to make a fool of yourself and act like a crazy person in the stands, like a couple people have been recently, because we've had two high-profile stories of adult fans in the audience acting ridiculous towards children.
This is our under-the-radar story of the week. What the heck is wrong with the fans?
I don't think this is too under the radar because this Karen that was over in Philadelphia is maybe the most hated woman in baseball right now. For those of you who somehow don't know what happened, there was a home run hit in the Philadelphia Phillies game, and a Philadelphia Phillies fan, a woman, took the ball from a child, basically, who was very excited and clearly wanted to keep the ball, took it from him and threw it onto the field, taking away the home run ball the child had caught, which is like, you gotta think that that's a low level. It's hard to get lower than that in terms of the things you can do at a baseball game that aren't a crime.
I assume it's an opposing team's home run, the idea that you're throwing the ball back because the other team hit it. And of course, good things come out of bad things sometimes. And Harrison Bader of the Phillies, gave the kid a bat after the game, and Bader's just, man, I love that player.
Right.
Love that guy.
But it's just like, I don't know. It's hard to think of the worst thing you could do at a baseball game that isn't a crime. And there are still several crimes you could probably do at a baseball game that wouldn't be as bad as what that woman did.
Well, we had
at least in the public.
Had earlier in the season, we had the guy, the CEO, stealing the cap.
Right. And it's like they're stealing it from kids. At least if it was
another. Ooh, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. You think?
Right.
So and how about the fans, the crazy Yankee fans at the World Series game last year?
Right.
That actually reached over and interfered with the play.
And
got thrown out forever. By the way,
much of these are examples of bad behavior in the stands, mostly in between other fans. we do have to look at some of the crazy bad behavior that is starting to crop up because of all the gambling and some of the things that fans are sending to players on social media and to their homes.
That's a great point.
The behavior is getting more and more extreme on the fan side, and it doesn't feel like it's coming from a place of almost overzealous passion, but a lot of times a place because of financial frustration at outcomes. It's not like the guy was trying to do anything. Sometimes it's not even that the guy did something
Of course.
bad. Sometimes it's that he won and people are pissed off that he pitched well.
In Jane Levy's book, she takes that on and talk about how, players are nervous about, the gambling going on because they're being personally accosted and chased and yelled at for, not making a play that cost the guy money.
Right.
And so we've seen baseball embrace the betting, and this is what you get.
Right. And I think the reason why baseball has embraced the betting on some levels is, one, the money, big part of it, but two, getting people to watch the games. As we go into our stat of the week here, which I think is something kind of interesting to talk about because it's something that we as baseball fans are both very fair and unfair to ourselves in that. And that stat of the week is games watched. And that, how many games do you need to watch as a baseball fan to be a true fan of your baseball team?
Well, our friend Kelly Franco, she says she's 3-inning fan before the pitch clock, maybe she's a 4-inning fan now, but she certainly doesn't need to watch the whole game, at least per her the moniker on her podcast.
I think you're gonna have to think about it that there's, to me, 3 distinct levels of watching a baseball game. One is physically going to the game yourself. No matter what, that's going to pertain to a certain level of immersion that you'll never get listening to it on the radio or watching it on TV. And then there's sitting there and either listening to the game intently or watching the game intently.
Actively.
85 to 90% of the time you are actively focused on the game.
I still like doing that.
You might miss a pitch here or there. We're all human. Even the right fielder, I think, occasionally takes a pitch off.
We watched the Met game on Friday night together, and that was a riveting game where the Mets got a 5-4 lead
with a crazy ending
and held on to the lead. And you had to watch every pitch to the end of the game. It was a terrific ending. It was a terrific baseball game, not just because the Mets won, just because you didn't know what was going to happen, and it made every pitch interesting to watch.
And then I think there's also just sitting there with the game on in the background as you do other stuff, which is, I think, how a lot of people sort of end up watching the game.
There is a certain idly listening to it, just listening to the voices. If you're listening to a radio broadcast,
I think it's a little more immersive if you're listening to a radio broadcast, or you're not having like your computer or your phone in front of you as you play a game or watch a stream or browse Twitter.
Right. But getting to your question, so what do you think it is? Like, okay, I'm a fan of XYZ team, and maybe I go to a game a year, if that. A lot of fans that are fans of teams don't get to go to any games, because they're too expensive, or they don't live anywhere near where the teams play necessarily. But how much do they have to actively watch to be considered still a fan? I think sometimes people don't watch very much at all.
Right, and
they follow their team,
and it's tough to say because, like, how much do you have to watch? If you watch 7 innings of a game, are you watching? Is that different than watching all 9 innings, every pitch of the game? Because how many games? I'm not even sure if I could say how many games I watch from start to finish in the course of a year. I don't think it's as many as I probably.
Unless you go to the game.
It's probably not as many as I think it is.
And we compare it to the other sports. The NFL started today here on Sunday, and so there's 17 games. So 17, for 3 hours, if you're a fan of a team, and you watch 50% of the games or something like that or more, you think you're a good fan of that team. If you're going to watch 90 baseball games, I don't think that's, that's way more than what people watch.
So if you were going to watch, if you watched your all 162 innings of a baseball,
games
of a season, watch everything, and you watch all 17 games of football, all 4 quarters in every game. How much more football would you need to watch to match that baseball season?
That's a huge amount.
357 hours. You would need to watch football games for 15 days straight to match the length of a baseball season's full viewing.
That's only because football games take 3 hours and 20 minutes now, and baseball games take less time.
But it just speaks to just how much baseball there is to consume over the course of a season. And I think, we might have, broadcasters and writers acting like it's an easy thing to, watch every game. But when it's literally your job, it's very different. You're going to approach it differently. I don't think I could watch every single game intently as a fan. I would like to do other things with my life. There's 162. There's only 360 days a year. I'm not giving up, almost the third or half of that just to baseball.
And you talk about the NBA and the NHL, and so they have 82 games in each of those seasons if you're a fan of those teams. And you can watch an NHL or NBA game probably about 2.5 hours, pretty religiously. It doesn't really go over overtime games happen or whatnot. So you understand what your commitment is. It's not, it's not as big a commitment to watching a baseball game.
Right, because it's like there was an interesting thing. So this was like just an informal poll that was done by a writer of an article on on CBS Sports. It was talking about how many games fans watched from start to finish. So for 0 to 15, start to finish, 0 to 15 games start the season, about 10% of people said that's what they did. 15 to 30 was 40% of fans watched 15 to 30 games start to finish.
I think that's great.
30 to 50 games was 20%.
Wow.
Yeah, right. Now, this is an informal, this is people are self-reporting. Then 50 to 80 was about 10%, 80 to 100 was 10%, and 100 plus was 10%. Now, I imagine both in the 80 to 100 and the 100 plus, that's people overestimating watching that many.
Or they
games,
work for the team.
Or they work for the team, right. But I do think that it kind of tells you that I think for most people, somewhere between 15 and 50 full games start to finish over the course of the year is a reasonable thing to expect.
I watch more than that.
Right. We both watch more than that. But I think if we actually counted up full game start to finish, it's probably a little bit less than that.
Well, right, because, our experience, or my experience at least watching games is, I'll watch a lot of times the beginning of the game or whatnot, but I may be doing other things during the game and not actively watching the game, game day on my phone to see do I go back and watch the game live? Right, you can actually run the game on your phone in MLB and watch your team.
Right, because sometimes it is nice at 8:15 when you look at the game and go, oh yeah, wow, it's 12-2 Brewers. You know what?
I don't need to be committed to this.
I don't need to be committed to this. I'm going to go do something else with my night. And you know what? That's a healthy thing as a fan. I think if you're sitting there, you're almost punishing yourself by watching that game.
And so it doesn't matter what the sport is, right?
You're not less of a fan because you don't watch that game, but we act like that.
If your team is stinking, in the game, and if we're watching a Knick game and they're down 23 at halftime, my desire to watch the second half is real low. I might check and see, did they cut it to inside 10 to make me go back and watch, or I might be done.
But as we get here into September and the playoff races heat up, and we start to get what every baseball fan seems to act like is such a terrible thing in bandwagon fans. Let's be honest with ourselves. If somebody just this month, they watched the full game of every game in the month of September, they've done a full season's fans worth of viewing in that period. They're just as much of a fan as you or I if they're committing that much time.
And I think you made the point off air to say, getting people to watch the games, right? If they're just casual fans and they watch once in a while, who cares how much they watch? We want them to watch baseball games.
Right. Because actually this kind of came about because somebody that I follow and I'm aware of, a Twitch TV streamer whose streaming name goes by the name of Ludwig, was talking about on one of his podcasts how he's gotten really into baseball. And they were like, oh, so do you watch like the full games? He's like, oh, no, I don't watch the games. I like the MLB posts like a 20-minute condensed highlight video. For every team gets this. You can see it's on YouTube after every single game. Yep. They post it for every game, and it is actually a pretty great way to watch the game. It's like
if you didn't see the game, you get a real sense of at least the plays that made the game happen.
You might probably the one thing you don't get is a sense for how a pitcher was pitching, unless he was particularly dominant, because then you're going to see lots of strikeouts. But you're only just seeing him throw pitches and have people swing and miss. But that's how a lot of people are going to be able to engage with a full baseball game, because 20 minutes isn't a 2 or 3 hour experience.
Right. Active watching, you get to see the nuances, obviously, in a game that you can't get in a 20-minute summary or a box score. When you just see that the pitcher was struggling with location because you're watching actively, you can say, oh, he's really having a tough time, throwing a strike right now. Whereas if you're looking at a box score or you see just a highlight package, you may not catch that.
Right. But we as baseball fans should be welcoming the people who consume the game that way. The people that come in September as a bandwagon fan, because every one of those people might end up being somebody who loves baseball just the same way we do, and is now another crazy person that's watching 50 to 100 full games throughout the course of a season.
Viewership is up in general. Regular season viewing is up this year, and
attendance is up.
Attendance has been up. Look, the playoffs are doing better every year in terms of adding people, but they don't get the numbers that the NFL does. So all baseball fans go, oh, well, we're not. It's the national pastime is football now because more people watch. baseball shouldn't worry about that.
No.
That's like 162 games. A season is a story. It's a narrative.
And you know what, baseball fans, you should be glad. Baseball season starting is not a cause for the wives of America to lament that they've just lost their husband for 16 hours every
1973 here.
But that's what happened. How many young guys sit there on their couch drinking beer, checking their fantasy stats all day as football is on TV?
Well, yeah, there you go. When it comes to
there's a lot,
and that's the whole. There goes the betting thing again.
Right.
When it comes into that. So I don't do that, and so I'm not watching the game to see how are the Rockies doing in Arizona because I have a bet on the game or something.
And you know
like
what's
that.
really nice about that is that because you don't do that, when it's not going well, you can just walk away.
Exactly. I'm in it for the love of the game. So I think the way that people are watching, it's not going to be the way that we romanticize in my generation. Going to a baseball game, scoring the game, being actually because there wasn't any other distraction for you to do. You didn't have a phone, you didn't have something to do. You would just watch the game because that was what was there.
You could do.
So now we have all these other ways of just passing the time while you're watching a game, and sometimes what you're doing is more interesting than the game that you're watching. And I think we have to
welcome that. Look past that and welcome in all these new fans with open arms.
But the streaming, I think, is going to be the future of baseball. And not that that's any earth-shattering statement. You mentioned the other night the NFL had a game on YouTube.
Yeah,
and so the best thing about that was, I think, is that everybody was able to stream the game in real time without crashing the system, and they had a lot of viewers and all that. Eventually, if you have that kind of outlet, you won't need to go look in every godforsaken place to see where your game is playing. You'll know you can go find it in a particular place and watch it. That's really hurting viewership too.
And for me, one of the exciting things is that YouTube lets some selected streamers restream the game with their own commentary, which would be really fun for fans to be able to stream the game and sort of get that same thing where they can go out. Because, that would be something we've talked about that would be really fun to do, sort of provide our own commentary for the game. It's just, the lack of ability to have anybody see what we're talking about is always the big issue.
You think Keith Hernandez moans a lot? Just listen to me during a Met game.